Hello everybody, it's Jamie from Old Shipping Lines and welcome back to another Let's Read a Book video. Before we begin, I just want to say if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. It helps a lot. So yeah, let's begin and I hope you enjoy the video. The wreck of the HMS Rohila. At the turn of the 20th century, the British Empire spanned the globe, and as British influence expanded throughout her colonies, overseas trade blossomed. Britain became the engineering workshop of the world, producing industrial machinery, locomotives, coal, hardware, cotton and fancy goods. It was also a boom time for the shipbuilding industry, whose order books reflected the shipping company's demand for the latest and most efficient vessels. British exports were unprecedented, and every overseas consignment travelled by sea. With passenger air travel still in an embryonic stage, overseas travellers went by liner or passenger cargo steamers. Understandably, the shipping companies prospered, and wishing to retain the position in their highly lucrative trade, they continually reinvested in new vessels. Not only did a new ship cause a stir amongst prospective travelers, each new vessel embraced the last advances in technology. Significant factors as ever were the running costs, or more accurately, the fuel efficiency. Each vessel generally provided a quarter of a century of service to her masters, before making a final ignominious voyage to the breakers. Traditionally, shipping companies christened the subsequent replacement vessel with the name of the scrapped vessel, thereby retaining a sense of company history. The majority of vessels have an unmarkable career, while others, through a dire chain of events, attain everlasting infamy, the RMS Titanic being the prime example. Although considerably smaller than the magnificent White Star transatlantic liner Titanic, the British India Company steamship Rohila is also remembered for all the wrong reasons, infamy in the shipping circles being directly linked to the mortality figures produced by a shipwreck. While under construction at Belfast shipyard Holland and Wolff, vessel number 381 gradually transformed from series of frames and hull sections to a vessel capable of carrying 100 first-class passengers and 65 second-class, entrusted to care of crew of 157. On 6 September 1906, as a crowd cheers drowned out the sound of the brass band, Rohila throttled down the slipway. In deference to the destination, they named her after the people of Rohilkland, who populated the area east of Delhi. On completion, she would serve on the London to Calcutta service with the similarly designed ship Reva, torpedoed in 1918 while serving as a hospital ship. Throughout the winter season, she would carry troops to offset operating costs. In 1908, she joined Rewa in the role of permanent troop ship. Both vessels represented British India during the 1910 Spearhead Review staged for King George V. During the ceremony, Rohila hosted the House of Lords and Rewa carried the House of Commons. 2 days after her hostilities with Germany commenced, Rohila was requisitioned as a naval hospital ship. She rapidly underwent conversion and took up her new career equipped with a pair of operating theaters and X-ray equipment. Her cabins became hospital wards. 10 days later, the HMS Rohila, commanded by Captain David Landless Nielsen, steamed for Southampton to the naval base at Scapa Flow to undergo training. While there, a 19-year-old midshipman from the battleship HMS Collingwood arrived. The patient was none other than Prince Albert, suffering with acute pain from a developing appendicitis. Butchered the word. The Rohila, with her royal patient aboard, was hastily dispatched to Aberdeen, where on arrival they were to collect the royal surgeon, who had travelled from London by express train. Among the ship's company were 50 members of the Barnard-Wicks ambulance brigade, employed as a naval sick berth reservist, who had been responsible for Albert's medical care. They supervised his transfer to the hospital, where 2 days later he was operated on. The prince survived to become King George VE. Unfortunately, 12 of the Barnard-Wicks men would perish on the final voyage of Rohila. The HMS Rohila departed the 3rd of 4th on Tuesday, 29 October 1914. On board, she carried 229 persons on a mercy mission to Belgium to collect wounded. The following morning, the North Sea weather began to deteriorate, the heavy seas causing the vessel to roll considerably. As a pre-initiative measure against hostile naval bombardments, the northeastern coastline adhered to a nighttime blackout. At sea, illuminated buoys were extinguished, while those with warning bells were muffled. Deprived of these navigational aids, master marines then steered by dead reckoning and sailors' intuition. Captain Nielsen had taken his bearings as he passed the Tyne estuary, for he knew the Whitby lighthouse was unlit. He not only faced navigational hazards, but the likelihood of a submarine attack. Rohila suddenly jolted under an impact. Nelson shouted, "Mine! My God!" as he felt certain he struck a mine. The vessel reverberated with a tortured, grating sound. A ship passed on the starboard side, and 10 minutes later it was reported someone was signaling the ship. At 20 minutes to 4 in the morning, Coast Guard Albert James Jeffreys sighted the hospital ship, bearing I lost where I was. Hospital ship. Bearing a north-northwest and heading towards the Whitby Rock. He used the Morse lamp to signal the ship, and when he thought she could hear, sounded the foghorn, but received no reply. Captain Nelson ordered the Morse signal to be read, before the information could be acted upon. The disaster unfolded. Nelson thought heading his damaged vessel away from the coast would lead to a high loss of life. He ordered full speed ahead, now reduced to 12 knots, and a mile along the coast deliberately drove Rohila aground upon rocks near Seltwick Nap, 1 mile south of Whitby. The terrific impact impaled the hospital ship upon the outcorp, where she lay marooned 500 yards from the shoreline, and surrounded by a gale-whipped sea. The ship lights went out almost immediately after she struck, owing to flooding in the engine room. Many of the engine room staff perished on impact, drowned by the inrush of water. Scores of lifebelts were washed away before they could be used. And only one of the ship boats remained intact. Rohila then broke in two across the well deck, the after section swinging violently around, tethered to the forward section by the propeller shaft. Upon the cliff top, the vigilant Coast Guard fired signal rockets, summoning the rescue lifeboat. To this day, it remains one of their most difficult rescue missions. Under the captain's orders, they successfully launched launched the steamer's only sound lifeboat prior to arrival of the Whitby lifeboat. The boat manned by 6 able-bodied seamen. The boatswain's mate and Mr. Guinea, the second mate, attempted to take a line on shore. One survivor recounted, "We had spent a miserable night shivering on deck, for it was not until daylight we could do anything. Then the captain called for volunteers to take the only remaining boat and row ashore with a line. A lot of us volunteered, and 5 of us were sent with the second mate. What a journey it was! We had hardly got afloat when one oar after another was smashed. It seems a miracle that we got ashore. We lost the line when a big wave came and nearly swept us. It was a wonder that the boat righted herself, and when she did, she was half filled with water. Close in we were upset, and it was only with the assistance of the people on shore that we were able to scramble to safety through the water, which was breast high. Throughout Friday night and Saturday, valiant efforts were made to reach the stranded ship. On Friday night, the rocket brigade fired rockets at the doomed ship, but their efforts were defeated by fierce wind, as the 5 rockets that landed on the ship were beyond the reach of the crew. The rocket rescue apparatus evolved specifically for maritime rescue. Each rocket expelled a thin line, and once a connection between the vessel and shore existed, the original line acted as a feeder for a heavier rope. To the stronger line, they attached a bosun chair. By using this primitive method, one by one, the marooned seamen could be brought ashore. Excuse me. The gale-force winds, whipped by huge seas, breaking the vessel into 3 parts. The bridge now being the only place of refuge. James Langsdale, coxswain of the Whitby lifeboat, first heard of the wreck on Friday. The wind and seas were tremendous. It would have been impossible to use the heavier boat. Gallantly, they launched the smaller lifeboat, and although the tons of water pouring over Rohila nearly washed them out of the lifeboat, they rescued 17 people. Reaching the vessel a second time through worsening conditions, they recovered 18 more. Following an interview with survivor T.C. Liver Jones, surgeon of the RNR, reported, A few minutes before 4 on Friday morning, there was a sudden crash and the lights went out. He proceeded on deck, but owing to the darkness, it was impossible to see where the ship was, but she was fixed. He did not see the captain, but heard him giving directions perfectly calmly, and they were being carried out. A lifeboat went to them shortly after daybreak, and 4 nurses and the stewards were put in the lifeboat. The captain ordered the woman to go first, then the doctors, sick attendants, crew and officers, leaving him as the last to be rescued. He could not see them landed as the sea was very heavy and the wind very hard, and the spray went high as the funnel. The second time about 17 were rescued. He was last to enter his lifeboat and helped to carry a doctor who was sick ashore. On Saturday morning, the upgoing lifeboat got within 20 yards of the wreck, but was driven off by heavy seas and a strong current. A trawler towed the lifeboat Robert and Mary Ellis close to the wreck, but could not approach close enough and returned to Whitby. The Scarborough lifeboat also failed to reach Rohila. The Whitby lifeboat launched from the beach and rowed through the seas towards the wreck, but had to return owing to the severity of the sea. These brave but futile efforts cast quite a gloom over the onlookers, many of whom had remained on duty on the cliffs throughout the night. That afternoon, the rocket brigade expected their expended their last rocket. Suddenly, the plight of those on board looked extremely grave. Faced with such a poor chance of survival, the survivors were signaled to risk it. Captain Nielsen suggested that the swimmers might try to make it to the shore. Many of the men took their chances in the raging sea. Nelson watched the currents and directed the swimmers accordingly. About 30 men reached the shore, thoroughly exhausted, but many failed. On Saturday night, Chief Officer Band swam ashore. 2 other swimmers survived. However, 2 more died in the attempt. The crowds on the shore made many gallant rescues by plunging into the surf and hauling the swimmers to safety. George Pervert saved many lives this way. Fearing darkness would halt the rescue operation, the Tennessee Territorial Engineers brought the searchlight by special train and assisted in the rescue work during Saturday night. Suspectedly, Nelson received a signal from the shore that a motor lifeboat was coming and signaled back, "Ship is breaking rapidly. Look out for swimmers. Low tide tonight, no time to lose." He then called all hands together and told them that the ship could not last until daybreak, and advised them to make rafts. Some men improvised life rafts from pieces of timber, but were washed out to sea with the ebb tide or washed ashore dead. Those remaining on board huddled together for warmth, for they had no food and heat and only a thimpful of fresh water each. The remaining 50 survivors were rescued at about 7 on the Sunday morning. The weather had moderated and the Shield's motor lifeboat, Henry Vernon, after a 9-hour journey, reached Whitby at 1 o'clock. After a brief respite, she went to the wreck, accompanied by Richard Elgon, the second coxswain of the Whitby lifeboat. Gallons of oil poured on the sea helped calm the water until the lifeboat was hit by a heavy sea. Those stranded on Rohila had endured 50 hours of atrocious conditions. The shield motor lifeboat, despite sustaining damage on the rocks or wreck, hove to in a round trip lasting less than an hour. The motorized lifeboat had rescued 50 souls. Press reports state the hospital ship carried 220 persons on board. Of these, only 146 were saved. And that was again the end of an episode of Let's Read a Book. I hope you enjoyed it, and I very enjoyed reading you this story, the first part at least. In another video there will be again the second part. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a good day or night wherever you are, and we will see each other again on our next voyage. Goodbye, everyone.